All right, let's do some Heideggerian analysis, and then I'm going to sort of construct a Heideggerian position out of evidences from Heidegger, and then present myself as taking on that position. I think one of the things that Heidegger does is shown in his letters between himself and Karl Jaspers, who is a close friend of his for a number of years leading up to the time when he, before 1927, I think, before he had published Being in Time. Um, and one can see there this exhorting of Jaspers towards Heidegger to take a position on some certain point. And I think this is Heidegger thought one does always have to take a position on points in order to be authentic in one's theoretical life. So you could see that as a embodiment of the generalized or supposedly I mean, if we're doing philosophy rather than thinking, you could say if somebody says, as Heidegger does, that we would be fooling ourselves to believe that in any science we've come to the last word. So then he gives the example of like the parallel postulate in basic mathematics, or better is probably Cantor in insisting adamantly and demonstrating to the adequate satisfaction of most of the people in the end of the 19th century that these problems that later became like the Gödel-Escher-Bach books, subject matter, this incompleteness theorem, through a different path, were presented in the claim that any formal set or collection of objects could not be accounted for mathematically, but they must be considered qualitatively, as it were. The set as a whole has always seemed to be qualitative rather than mathematicos in a certain sense means scientific and generalized thinking of the kind philosophy is about, but in another sense it means arithmetic. So it couldn't be presented arithmetically or geometrically. And that represents a change in the basic, they had that stupid Kuhn book. Somebody was kind enough to give me that book a long time ago, I should say. But it's still, of course, that book, Heidegger had already, not just Heidegger, but everybody had already discussed this at great length for the 50 years, or 100 years before that book, or Hegel's time onward, sort of. But it gives specific examples. But the point is, you're a mathematician acting in good faith, and you haven't really noticed this problem. And then you say, if I'm going to present mathematics not as, now they get out of the problem, because what they do is they indoctrinate all the young mathematicians to say, oh, math, it's not a science, it's more like music, it's more beautiful. Something like this, the beautiful mind, or something like that. So they get out of it and say it doesn't really matter that math isn't real, or that it wasn't what it used to claim to be. They don't even really address that problem. They don't remember this problem, as it were, in their institutional culture anymore. It's just been inoculated against with the idea that math is something more like music or an art, or so-called. But if in Cantor's time you came across that problem, or for Husserl you came across that problem, then there'd be a question, which in Eigentlichkeit, in authenticity, what do you hold to be the truth here? And then it's like a political situation, in that you have to, the people that really understand the problem have to say, this is what makes sense. The parallel postulate isn't, we don't really know that there couldn't be something, a genuine asymptote. We don't really know that it has to be strictly at like that sort of right angle shape as a parallel. It could be slightly tilted inward, and maybe it's still an asymptote, right? So the parallel postulate falls because that's so cogent. Somebody has to say, yeah, I think it does kind of fall. And then what does that mean? And so on. Somebody has to stake themselves, their shoulder, their guilt on it for the new shul or for the new school to open its doors and say, this is what our official teaching is. So that's the point, I think, of Heideggerian type of authenticity with respect to the intellect, with respect to these points which would have been in philosophy, would have had a slightly different status than they do for the thinker in Heidegger's sense, because the thinker is aware that he's part of this struggle in the intellect, and that therefore that the struggle in the intellect isn't just sort of vertical, but that has also this horizontal situation, and then the whole dizzying situation Nietzsche describes comes in. I mean, the vertical situation would be through Socratic discussion or something like that, or through Aristotelian chains of reasoning or treaties. We could go directly to the truth, and that we don't need existence to come into it, and that existence isn't a problem to come into that, but that we wouldn't be deluding ourselves if we said no, but existence is always coming in, and then therefore we can't think it's just a horizontal issue, but it's also horizontal to the sky. It's just a question of being a greedy fisherman and casting a good net out into the stars and catching them. But that also, the stars are always sort of changing their, that great wheel in the sky is always turning somehow, and the stars go their shadowy ways, and there's more things happening, and et cetera, and then somebody who says, yes, that's cogent, as everybody started doing in the 19th century, then comes into different problems, and then it becomes obvious that the people before weren't totally absorbed in these problems that were absorbed in. They didn't. That one interesting thing I wanted to superimpose on this was this sense that people have different tacks on how to analyze what is the case with respect to facticity. So there's a discussion, a very vigorous discussion, quite exciting discussion on the gaggle between Peter Lavelle and George Samueli, and right at the end of the discussion on this, so I guess this is Monday morning, on the Monday morning one, for like the last 15 minutes or so, there's this dispute where I think so one strategy of Heidegger is to seek the essence of a thinking. He says that's the main thing, to get the essence of a thinking, and all this, what's usually the scholarly knowledge of all the innumerable details, is secondary. So this was kind of a problem one often sees in conversation. So the one party, Samueli, took up the view that no, you can't say straight out that Israel is carrying out a genocide, because I'll get into the reasons why I think he said that. And then the other guy, Peter Lavelle, who obviously seems to take a more Sopranos type of there's no coincidences type attitude, said that they are doing it. De facto, they're already doing it. So what are you talking about? How can you deny that they're starving those people in Palestine? So I think the essence of this was kind of like that Samueli was taking up a legalistic attitude, which in the full sense blends over into, I think, the common sense attitude of everyone, in the sense that we have the consideration of mens rea, of intentions, and did they do it on purpose? Did the hierarchy of degrees of murder? How much did they plan it out, etc.? And yeah, there's a tendency to bring that over to ordinary life, and probably it always does. See, I don't know. That's what's so difficult in this historical condition. If we are unmoored, then we keep asking ourselves, well, weren't there all kinds of cultures that have been the New World people, Evans Pritchard, who have had a totally different attitude about these things, and actually even that plays a huge role in American law too, because one of the big American jurists who wrote a book on the common law went back and he said, look at the motives of the law are totally different in great antiquity. Like, you'd think that the reason, if you just have the law, some law about if a wagon runs a man's foot over, he has to render that wagon to the man as some kind of reprisal. You think it was about reimbursement or about something, or maybe punishment or something like that. But the original archaic meaning of it was that they thought of they regarded the wagon as kind of ensouled, and then they thought the man that the wagon hurt had to take the wagon so that he could deal with it as he saw fit, punish it, burn it, strand it out in a wasteland somewhere. It was up to him how to deal with we're talking about a guy who's been crippled or something by it, maybe, or seriously injured. But so then Oliver Wendell Holmes took that position. Then you see it's like, they're totally different, but you think, but they're just stupid. They're just in a mythology or something. So that's what Dugan means by the racism. When you take that, that's the full meaning of racism in Dugan, I think. When you take this anthropologically fulsome position where you just say, yeah, they were just making a mistake. They were doing things. That's Fukuyama. The whole of Fukuyama is kind of like that, I think. But so in this case, I think, in the same way that there's this split between attitudes which can argue about whether are the Israelis carrying out a certain starvation in Palestine, and then you could see how it becomes, from a legalistic attitude, there's a certain way you want to demonstrate your case, and then you can say things like, but they're negotiating to let more aid in, or something like that. And then there could be counter argument. Oh yeah, but they just do that in order for PR, because they have a long-term, they're realists and they know they have to keep up appearances, but they're already aiming at starving them. And then there'd be counter arguments whether this is really proved by the standard of judicial practice in some sense, something like this. And it's totally unclear in a certain way to what degree this is a quality of genuine human intelligence that always selects this kind of reasoning as the most sensible, and to what degree it's tied to a specific practice which has been taken up without truly believing in it, or without even thinking that it's meaningful to believe in it or not. This is just the way it's done. These are the technicians' bag of tricks for the attorneys. And then you have the other side where there's kind of this obvious defectiveness in the there are no coincidences type of reasoning. And yet, just because it's obviously defective somehow doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong all the time. But it gets very complicated. But Yeah, then one sees how also in our institutions these decisions have to be taken constantly. So I think, yeah, if we see things more this way, we're being, yeah, more Heideggerian, which is to say we're more admitting the situation as it actually is, but in um, a, a determination that has some exactness to it.